The Resistance's underground hideout was silent, save for the occasional hum of machinery and the steady shuffle of boots against cold, concrete floors. Captain Elena Harris stood before a large map sprawled across a dimly lit room, her fingers tracing the red lines that marked alien strongholds across the globe. The final human cities had fallen, and only small pockets of survivors clung to life in scattered, isolated bunkers. "How much longer do you think we can hold out?" Lieutenant Marco asked, his voice grim. He had been by her side through countless battles, but even his usual optimism was starting to fade. Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the map, her heart heavy. The last of Earth's defenses had already crumbled. The aliens, known only as the Exal Corps, were brutal conquerors. Their fleet was vast, their technology far more advanced than anything humanity had. And now, Earth was on the brink of becoming a forgotten world, a lost prize in their endless expansion. Then, Dr. Michael Jensen, the Resistance's lead scientist, entered the room. His unkempt hair and frantic expression were enough to catch Harris's attention. "We've found it," he said, his voice laced with excitement. "The artifact." Harris looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Jensen held up a small crystalline object encased in a protective glass box. It seemed unremarkable at first, a pale blue gem, no larger than a human fist. But there was something about it that radiated power, something that felt different. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "In an old ruin beneath the eastern ruins of what was once Washington, D.C., Jensen explained. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. It appears to be a source of immense energy, far beyond our technology." Harris narrowed her eyes. "We've heard rumors about ancient artifacts. You're telling me this is our last hope?" "Not just a hope," Jensen replied eagerly. "This could be humanity's salvation. I believe it could level the playing field. If we can unlock its secrets, we could turn the tide of the war." The idea seemed too good to be true, and for a moment, Harris felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But with that hope came a deep, sinking feeling. The risk was enormous. "How sure are you about this?" Harris asked, her voice steady, despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Jensen hesitated, then replied, "I'm not sure. But it's the only shot we've got left." A silence fell between them. Marco spoke first, his voice tinged with desperation. "What do we have to lose, Captain? If this thing works, it could change everything." Harris studied the artifact, her mind racing. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. This could be the key to victory, but it could also be their doom. "All right," Harris said finally, her decision made. "We activate it. But we proceed with caution. If this thing does what you think it can, we're going to need every last ounce of strength we've got to control it." Dr. Jensen nodded, a mix of excitement and nervous energy swirling in his eyes. "We'll start immediately." As Harris turned to leave the room, her mind replayed the moment she had made the decision. The Resistance had one shot, just one chance to save humanity. It was a gamble, and the odds were long. But if they didn't take it, Earth's last hope would vanish into the ashes of history. But the aliens weren't defenseless. Their weapons were still formidable, and their ships unleashed a barrage of firepower. But the humans, now enhanced by the artifact, moved with ease, dodging blasts that would have once been impossible to avoid. "We've got this," Marco shouted, his voice full of confidence. They don't know what hit them. For the first time since the invasion began, the humans had the upper hand. But Harris knew this victory, however sweet, was just the beginning. The Xal Corps were relentless, and they would come back stronger. The real battle hadn't even begun yet. As the last alien scout fell, Harris took a moment to breathe, her chest heaving from exertion. It felt good to fight back, to see the aliens finally retreating. But the victory was bittersweet. The power they had gained from the artifact had come with its own price. They weren't invincible, just stronger, faster, and perhaps even more fragile than they realized. "Hold the line," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is just a taste of what's to come. The war isn't over yet." The sounds of the battlefield began to fade as Captain Harris and her team infiltrated deeper into the heart of the alien mothership. The Xal Corps had been forced to retreat, but the victory felt hollow. Too many unanswered questions remained. The resistance had barely scratched the surface of the alien threat, and their newfound power, as exhilarating as it was, still felt like a volatile unknown. As they made their way through the alien ship's massive corridors, the walls pulsated with an eerie light. The architecture was unlike anything the Resistance had seen before, organic, almost alive, with strange glyphs carved into the surfaces. The air smelled sterile, cold, and thick with alien technology. Harris led the group forward, her senses on high alert. The alien ship was silent, too silent. There should have been guards, patrols, something. But there was only an oppressive stillness. "It's too quiet," Marco whispered, his voice barely audible as he walked beside her, scanning the corridors for threats. "Something doesn't feel right." Harris nodded, her instincts screaming at her to proceed cautiously. The artifact's power had given them the upper hand on Earth, but they were still treading into the unknown. What if this was a trap? What if the aliens were waiting for them to make a move? They reached a massive chamber, its center occupied by a strange, pulsating core. It hummed with an unnatural energy, and as Harris approached, she felt a wave of pressure in her chest, as though the very air around her was charged with electricity. "Stay alert," Harris ordered, her voice low but firm. She turned to Dr. Jensen, who had been scanning the walls, his eyes fixed on an unusual array of symbols etched into the surface. "These markings, they're almost identical to the ones on the artifact," Jensen said, his voice quivering with both excitement and fear. "It looks like this ship was built to harness the same kind of energy." "Are you saying the aliens know about the artifact?" Harris asked, her brow furrowed. Jensen nodded, still staring at the symbols. "Not just know about it. They built this ship to tap into the same kind of power, energy capable of altering human biology. They were trying to harness it, to evolve, to create a race of beings with power far beyond the normal limits of their kind. They tried to force their species to transcend their limits." Harris's mind raced. The possibilities were endless, but so were the risks. As much as this new power seemed like a miracle, it felt unnatural. The idea of fighting back against the alien invaders with powers that defied reason was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I don't trust it," she said finally, her voice steady, though doubt gnawed at her. "We need to be cautious, if we can't control this." Before she could finish, an alarm blared throughout the bunker, followed by a sharp voice over the intercom. "Captain Harris, we've spotted alien scouts approaching." Her heart sank. The Xal Corps were coming. There was no time to second-guess. The artifact had given them power, but would it be enough to face the greatest threat humanity had ever known? "Suit up," Harris ordered, her voice hard. "We fight now. We don't get another chance." The air in the bunker was thick with tension as the alarm blared relentlessly. Captain Harris tightened her grip on her rifle, the weight of it now feeling lighter than ever. The energy coursing through her body made everything seem sharper, her hearing, her sight, even her awareness of the smallest movements around her. She could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath her feet, the soft hum of the electronics in the walls, and the distant echoes of hurried footsteps. "This is it," Marco said beside her, his voice filled with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. His new abilities were clearly taking hold as well. He moved with an unnatural grace, his every motion precise, calculated. "We're about to find out if this is really going to work." Harris nodded, pushing down the storm of emotions churning inside her. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, all of it could cloud her judgment. She couldn't afford that. They had no choice but to act. "We've trained for this," she said, her voice low but commanding. Now we fight. The Resistance soldiers, newly transformed by the artifact's energy, were suited up and ready. Each one moved with a newfound confidence, their enhanced strength and speed evident in every step. Some had undergone subtle physical changes, eyes gleaming with heightened perception, their skin faintly glowing in the dim light. But it wasn't just their bodies that had changed. Their minds had expanded too. Tactical strategies were now second nature, and their coordination was flawless. Outside, the alien scout ships were approaching the bunker, hovering like predatory birds circling their prey. The Xal Corps had never seen anything like this before. They expected a quick and easy victory, as always. The Resistance, however, had a different plan. Harris turned to Dr. Jensen, who stood by the control panel, watching the alien ships on his screens. "Are we ready?" she asked. Jensen nodded, his face a mix of awe and apprehension. The artifact's energy is fully integrated into the Resistance forces. They've been modified at a genetic level. We've never seen anything like this before. If we attack now, we have a real chance. Harris's heart pounded as she watched the enemy ships closing in. The plan was simple: strike fast and hit hard. They couldn't afford to wait and hope for the best. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. "All units, move out," Harris ordered, her voice carrying with the weight of authority. The Resistance troops surged forward, moving with fluid precision. It was almost like they were one entity, their movements synchronized in a way that would have been impossible before the artifact's influence. The first wave of alien scouts descended, their ships landing with a soft hiss on the scorched earth outside the bunker. The Resistance didn't hesitate. Harris led the charge, her legs moving faster than she had ever thought possible, her senses heightened to the point where she could anticipate every movement of the enemy before it happened. With a cry of determination, she dove forward, her new strength propelling her through the air. She landed in front of the nearest alien soldier, and before it could even react, she struck, delivering a devastating blow that sent the creature flying. It was faster than anything she had ever done, and the impact was immediate. The alien didn't even stand a chance. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Alien soldiers, once untouchable in their superior armor and weapons, found themselves caught off guard by the humans' sudden speed and ferocity. Marco, moving with an agility that seemed almost inhuman, tore through their ranks, incapacitating them one by one with deadly precision. The team sprang into action. Harris felt the power surging through her as she moved with deadly speed, her limbs cutting through the air in ways that felt almost effortless. She was faster than she had ever been, her strength far beyond that of any normal human. Marco followed suit, his own agility allowing him to weave through the alien ranks with a precision that was nothing short of extraordinary. But the Xal Corps weren't going down easily. Their weapons fired in quick bursts, the sound of plasma blasts filling the air. Harris ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding a blast that scorched the ground where she had been standing just moments before. The battle was intense. Harris's heart raced, but her mind was clear, sharper than ever. She could feel every movement of the enemy, anticipate their attacks, and counter with devastating force. But even as the alien soldiers fell one by one, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the more they fought, the more dependent they became on the power coursing through their veins. As the last of the elite soldiers crumpled to the ground, Harris took a breath, sweat trickling down her brow. Her pulse was racing, and the weight of her actions pressed down on her. "We're getting close," she said, her voice low but urgent. "But I don't like how this feels. We're on the edge of something dangerous." Jensen nodded, his face pale. "I can't help but wonder. What if this power is what destroyed the Xal Corps in the first place? What if we're repeating their mistakes?" Harris's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure we don't. Let's finish this." They pressed on, the central node now within reach. But as they neared it, the air grew heavier, the sense of foreboding increasing. The power of the artifact might have tipped the scales in their favor for now, but would it be enough to stop the Xal Corps? and save humanity from falling into the same trap. The corridors of the alien mothership grew narrower as Captain Harris and her team pushed forward, every step heavier than the last. Their mission was close to completion, but with each passing moment, the sense of foreboding deepened. The walls of the ship seemed to close in on them, the eerie glow of the alien technology casting long shadows that seemed to shift with a mind of their own. Harris could feel the power of the artifact pulsing inside her, filling her veins with an energy she could no longer ignore. It was as if every part of her body was alive with electricity, and despite the immense strength it gave her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Xalcor had felt it too, this insidious, addictive power. The thought that they had been consumed by their pursuit of it was a constant weight on her mind. "We're almost there," Marco said, his voice tight with focus. The energy in his movements was unmistakable. He was faster, more agile than before, but even he was beginning to show signs of strain. The power was taking its toll on all of them, even if they couldn't yet understand how. The central node was just ahead, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost alive. It was the heart of the ship, the core of the aliens' might, and Harris knew that disabling it was their only hope of stopping the Xalcor invasion. But the closer they got, the more powerful the feeling became, like they were being drawn into a trap. "Stay alert," Harris warned, her voice steady, but the unease in her chest was growing. "We don't know what we're about to face." As they reached the final stretch of the corridor, the air grew thick with tension. The walls around them flickered with the same strange symbols that had been present in the artifact. Harris's mind reeled. What if these symbols weren't just warnings, but messages from the past, warnings about what humanity might become if they didn't stop the use of the artifact? Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, a deep rumble echoing throughout the ship. The lights flickered, and a low growl resonated through the corridors. It wasn't just the ship shaking. It was as if something in the very heart of the Xalcor technology had awakened. The underground lab was abuzz with activity. Scientists and engineers worked feverishly to prepare for the artifact's activation. Its unearthly glow cast strange shadows on the walls, and the faint hum of its energy was almost hypnotic. Captain Harris stood off to the side, her arms folded, watching Dr. Michael Jensen as he meticulously calibrated the equipment around the artifact. "This is it," Jensen murmured to himself, barely containing his excitement. "The key to everything." Harris couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. The alien forces had crushed humanity's best defenses with ease. The Xalcor were calculating, efficient, and ruthless. The idea that this small object could be the game changer seemed almost too good to be true. But, as she had said before, what else did they have left? "Everything's ready, Captain," Jensen called, his voice shaking with anticipation. "We're going to power it up. Brace yourself." Harris nodded, though her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. But this was humanity's last stand. There was no room for hesitation. Jensen pressed a series of buttons, and the artifact hummed to life. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the glow intensified, and a shockwave of energy rippled outward, vibrating through the walls. The equipment connected to it flickered, then surged to life. Everyone in the room froze, staring at the artifact as if it were some kind of celestial being. The air seemed to hum with raw power. Suddenly, the energy began to spread, moving outward in undulating waves that touched every person in the room. A strange sensation spread through Harris's body, an electric tingle running through her veins. It was as if her senses were expanding, as if her mind were opening up to something vast and unknown. She blinked, trying to focus, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something deep within her was changing. "Captain, you okay?" Marco's voice broke through her daze, his face pale. He was standing beside her, his expression one of shock. I don't know," Harris said, her voice unsteady. "Something's happening." Around them, the rest of the resistance personnel began to react similarly. Some staggered, their faces contorting in surprise and pain. A few dropped to their knees, but it wasn't weakness. It was as though their bodies were struggling to handle the torrent of power flooding through them. Jensen, wide-eyed, was watching the readings on his console, his breath quickening. "It's working. It's working better than I thought." He looked up, his face alight with excitement. "The energy is triggering something in your genetic makeup, an ancient dormant power we've never tapped into before." "What does that mean?" Marco asked, struggling to stay upright as the energy surged. "It means," Jensen said, eyes widening with realization, "you're going to be stronger, faster, more than human." At that moment, the transformation became evident. Captain Harris felt the change most acutely. Her muscles felt as if they were being stretched and expanded. Her mind sharpened to a clarity she had never experienced. She could hear the soft hum of the equipment in the lab more clearly, the rustling of the others' movements, and even the faintest sounds from outside the bunker. She turned toward Marco, and without thinking, she reached out, her hand moving so quickly that she barely saw it happen. Marco's eyes widened as she caught a wrench that had fallen from a nearby workbench midair. How did you?" he stammered. "I don't know," Harris said, her voice barely above a whisper. She flexed her hand, testing her newfound strength. It felt like nothing she'd ever experienced. "But this is impossible." One by one, the other resistance members were adjusting to their new abilities. The room buzzed with nervous energy and awe. Their physical limits had been pushed beyond anything they could have imagined. But with this power came an undeniable tension. The fear of losing control, the fear of what it might cost them. Dr. Jensen stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "This could be it," he said, voice crackling with excitement. "Humanity's evolution. Accelerated. We have the power to fight back. We can win this." The room was chaos. Harris's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Marco dodge another strike from the massive Xal core hybrid. The creature's power was overwhelming, each blow landing with enough force to shake the walls of the chamber. But Marco moved with uncanny agility, narrowly avoiding its claws as he lunged forward, aiming for its weak spots. "Keep going, Marco," Harris shouted, her voice cutting through the storm of violence. "We need time." She fired her rifle, unloading a volley of rounds at the hybrid, but the creature's armored skin absorbed the blasts with ease. The hybrid let out a deafening roar, its massive form swaying slightly, but it wasn't enough. It seemed to grow even more furious, as if the energy from the core was feeding its rage. Jensen was already at the central node, his face twisted in concentration as he hacked into the alien technology. Sparks flew as he yanked at wires, desperately trying to sever the link between the core and the artifact's power. But every time he made progress, the ship retaliated, its defenses activating to protect the core. "It's like they've built a failsafe into the system," Jensen called out, frustration thick in his voice. "I need more time, Harris." Harris's gaze snapped back to Marco, who had just barely avoided another devastating strike from the hybrid. He was panting, sweat dripping from his brow, but his movements were still fluid. Too fluid, almost. She could see it now, the dark side of their new abilities. They were faster, stronger, but every use of that power seemed to take more of them. "Marco, pull back," Harris ordered, realizing they couldn't keep up the fight forever. The artifact's energy was flowing through them, but what would it cost in the long run? Would they become just like the Xal core, overcome by the very power that had once been their salvation? Marco hesitated for only a second before leaping back, narrowly avoiding the hybrid's outstretched claws. His eyes were wild with the rush of power. "I'm not stopping until that thing is dead," he growled. "I know," Harris said, her voice tight with concern. "But we can't keep doing this. We need to end this now." She turned to Jensen, who had managed to bypass the ship's defenses. The central node was beginning to crackle with energy, and the air was thick with anticipation. They didn't have much time left. If the hybrid wasn't stopped, it would tear them apart. But even more pressing was the realization that the artifact's power could rip them apart from the inside out. Jensen turned to Harris, his face pale and filled with urgency. "I think I've got it. I need one last push. If I can overload the node, it'll cut off the flow of power to the hybrid." Harris nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She turned back to the hybrid, her rifle in hand, and took a deep breath. Her team needed her. This was it. "Marco, take it down. I'll cover you," she shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the hybrid's growl. Without hesitation, Marco darted forward once more, his enhanced speed a blur. The hybrid swung a massive arm, but Marco ducked under the blow and dashed to the creature's side, slamming his fist into its armored plating with a force that sent it stumbling back. Harris opened fire, unleashing a barrage of rounds at the hybrid, aiming for its exposed joints. Each shot seemed to chip away at the creature's defenses, weakening it bit by bit. The creature staggered, its growls turning into a shrill screech of frustration. Jensen shouted from behind them, "I'm ready. On your mark, Harris." "Now," she cried. Marco leaped onto the hybrid's back, his fists pounding into its spine as the creature howled in pain. At the same moment, Jensen initiated the overload, sending a pulse of energy through the central node. The entire ship shuddered as the power surged through the alien technology, causing the hybrid to convulse. The explosion of energy was deafening. Harris had to shield her eyes as the room was filled with a blinding light. The hybrid's screeching stopped abruptly as the energy surged outward, blasting the creature into the far wall of the chamber. When the light faded, all that remained was the crumpled form of the hybrid. Its body was charred and smoking, its once glowing eyes dimmed. The room was eerily silent. Jensen's voice broke the stillness. "It's done. The connection is severed." Harris let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, feeling the weight in her chest lift slightly. They had won. The hybrid was dead, the flow of power cut off, and the core now dimmed to a dull, lifeless glow. But as she looked at her team, she couldn't help but wonder, had they truly won? The power of the artifact had been their weapon, but it had also been their greatest threat. They had defeated one enemy, but the battle against the corruption inside them was far from over. "We've won this fight," Harris said, her voice steady. "But the war is far from over." The chamber was quiet now, the last echoes of the battle fading into an unsettling silence. The alien hybrid lay crumpled against the wall, its massive form reduced to nothing more than a lifeless husk. The central node, once alive with pulsing energy, now flickered weakly. The invasive hum of the XAL core technology had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Harris stood motionless, her pulse still pounding in her ears. Sweat trickled down her brow, her body aching from the battle. But it was the weight of the artifact's power that truly weighed on her mind. They had won, yes, but at what cost? "Captain." Marco's voice broke through the quiet, tinged with exhaustion. "We did it, but I don't feel like celebrating." Harris turned to him, her eyes searching his face. Marco had been one of the most affected by the artifact's power. The rush of energy, the incredible strength, it was almost as if it had changed him. He wasn't the same person she'd led into battle. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. "I don't feel like celebrating either," she admitted, her voice soft, but firm. "We've won a battle, Marco, but we haven't won the war. Not yet." Jensen, who had been silent for the past few minutes, slowly walked up beside them, his face pale and drawn. "The artifact's power is still inside us. It hasn't gone away. We might have stopped the XAL core for now, but the real fight is just beginning." Harris nodded gravely. "I know. The XAL core were just one threat, but now we face a different kind of danger, one that could destroy us from within." Jensen's eyes met hers, his concern evident. "We need to figure out what happens next. We can't keep using the artifact like this, not without understanding the full scope of its power. The more we rely on it, the more we risk becoming like them, like the XAL core." There was truth in his words, and it hit Harris harder than she cared to admit. They were all teetering on the edge of something dangerous. The power of the artifact, while undeniably useful, had already changed them in ways they couldn't fully understand. And what was the point of winning this war if, in the end, they became just as corrupted as the very enemy they'd fought? "We have to control it," Harris said firmly. "We can't let it control us. But the truth is, we don't know how. We're playing with fire, and if we're not careful, it's going to burn us." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of their words settling in the room like a tangible force. For all their strength, for all their victories, they were still just human. And this power, the artifact, was too much for even the most advanced human minds to comprehend fully. "We'll need answers," Harris continued, breaking the silence. "We have to find out where the artifact came from, who created it, and why. Maybe there are others like it, others who can help us understand it, but we can't do that on our own." Jensen looked thoughtful. "I've been analyzing the data we recovered from the ship. There's something strange. The Xal Corps weren't the only ones searching for this kind of power. There's a whole network of civilizations out there, ancient ones, that have also been trying to harness this energy. The Xal Corps might have been the most aggressive, but they weren't the only ones." Harris clenched her fists. "So we're not just fighting the Xal Corps. There's something bigger at play." Jensen nodded. "Much bigger. If we don't figure out how to control this artifact and its power, the entire galaxy might be at risk." The Xal Corps were only the beginning. Harris's mind raced. She had been focused on the here and now, on the immediate threat to Earth. But Jensen's words were a sobering reminder that their battle was far from over. The artifact's power was not just a weapon. It was a key, a door to something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Marco, still recovering from the battle, stood up straighter, his expression more determined than before. "Then let's find those answers. Let's make sure we don't become the next Xal Corps. We've got one shot at this." Harris nodded, a slow, grim smile crossing her face. "We're not going to become them. We're going to make sure humanity survives this, no matter what it takes." With that, the team turned, leaving the dark, silent heart of the Xal Corps mothership behind them. The war was far from over, but they were determined to fight on. The artifact was no longer just a weapon. It was the key to humanity's future, and how they chose to use it would determine whether they became the saviors of the galaxy or its greatest threat. "Get ready," Harris hissed, her pulse quickening. The team formed a tight circle, weapons raised, as they stepped into the central chamber. Inside, the node stood, an immense black structure, pulsating with an energy that seemed to breathe. It was surrounded by alien technology, wires and tendrils extending from the node like veins. At its core, an orb of pure energy shimmered, swirling with violet colors. Before they could make a move, the ground split open in front of them, and out of the chasm emerged the most terrifying figure they had seen yet, a massive Xal Corps hybrid. It towered over them, its body a grotesque blend of organic and mechanical, its eyes glowing with a sickly green light. "The artifact," the creature's voice boomed, an unnatural echo reverberating in the chamber. "It is our salvation, and now it will be your doom." The hybrid's voice was distorted, filled with both fury and desperation. It was clear that this was no ordinary soldier. This was the embodiment of the Xal Corps' twisted evolution, their last-ditch effort to become more than they ever were. Harris raised her weapon, but the hybrid was faster than she could react. With a flick of its arm, it sent a wave of energy surging toward them, forcing the team to dive out of the way. Marco grunted as he rolled to his feet, his new strength allowing him to recover quickly. "We need to destroy that thing before it powers up. The artifact's energy is feeding it." Jensen's voice rang out from the back of the group. "The core, it's linked to the artifact. If we can sever the connection, we can stop it from using the power." But as they rushed toward the core, the hybrid swung its massive arms, sending another shockwave through the room. Harris barely managed to dodge the blast, but the force of it threw her off balance. The creature was too powerful, its size and strength overwhelming. "I'll handle it," Marco shouted, his voice strained. He sprinted forward with an agility that didn't seem possible, leaping toward the hybrid. The creature snarled and swung its massive claws at him, but Marco was faster, ducking and weaving with uncanny precision. Harris didn't hesitate. "Jensen, get to the core. We'll hold it off." The battle had reached a boiling point, and every instinct Harris had told her to fight harder, to push the limits of her new abilities. But deep down she wondered, was this the moment where they would fall into the same trap as the XL core? Had the power become too much for them to control? The revelation hit Harris like a gut punch. The XL core weren't just invaders, they were a failed version of what humanity might become if they weren't careful. Their lust for power had driven them to become something else entirely, something inhuman. "These symbols, they're a warning," Jensen continued, his voice trembling now. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It was created to prevent humanity from making the same mistakes that HAL Core did. Harris stood still, absorbing the weight of Jensen's words. The artifact wasn't just a source of power. It was a safeguard, a tool meant to protect humanity from its own ambition, from falling into the same trap the XL Core had. The power they now wielded was a double-edged sword. Its potential was limitless, but its misuse could lead them down the same dark path of corruption that had destroyed the alien race. "So, what happens if we continue using the artifact?" Marco asked, his voice cautious. "What if we become like them?" Harris turned toward the pulsating core, her thoughts racing. She had led her people into a war they could not afford to lose, but now, the stakes felt higher than ever. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their humanity. "We move forward," Harris said, her voice resolute. "But we do it carefully. We use the power of the artifact, but we must control it, never let it control us. We're not becoming like them." As they prepared to continue deeper into the ship, Harris couldn't shake the weight of the revelation. The XL Core's descent into madness had been caused by their attempt to evolve into something they were never meant to be. The artifact was a gift, but it could just as easily be their undoing. But there was no turning back now. The battle had only just begun. The tension inside the alien ship was palpable as Captain Harris and her team advanced deeper into the heart of the XL Core mothership. The revelation about the artifact weighed heavily on her mind. The power it granted was immense, but at what cost? The XL Core had been consumed by their lust for power, and now, humanity stood on the precipice of the same fate. "Captain," Marco said, his voice low as he glanced over at her, "are we sure we can control this? The more we use it, the more I feel different, like something's changing inside me." Harris didn't respond immediately. She could feel it too. The strength in her limbs, the sharpness of her senses. It was intoxicating, but it was also unsettling. She wasn't sure how much longer she could rely on this newfound power before it consumed her. "We have to stay focused," Harris said, her voice steady, but inside, doubt gnawed at her. "We fight with this power, but we control it. We can't let it control us." Jensen, who had been studying the alien technology with growing fascination, looked up from his datapad. "I think I've found something," he said. "There's a central node in this ship, something that appears to be the source of their power. It's connected to the artifact. If we can disable it, we can cripple the XL Core fleet and stop their invasion." "Good," Harris said, her tone sharp. "That's our target. But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more vulnerable we become. If they realize what we're doing, they'll send reinforcements." With their objective clear, they pressed on, the path becoming narrower and more labyrinthine as they ventured deeper into the ship. The walls pulsed in rhythm with the strange core they had seen earlier, sending tremors through the floor with every step they took. The air grew colder, and a feeling of unease began to creep over the team. As they neared the heart of the ship, Harris couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched. The silence in the ship was deafening, but her heightened senses seemed to pick up on every little sound. The distant hum of alien machinery, the subtle vibrations beneath their feet, and the occasional scrape of metal. Suddenly, a low, guttural voice echoed through the corridors. "You cannot stop us." Harris froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a disembodied, malevolent presence that sent a chill down her spine. Jensen looked at her, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" "I heard it," Harris said, her eyes narrowing. "We're not alone." Without warning, a series of alien soldiers appeared from hidden alcoves along the walls. They were faster, stronger than the scouts they had faced earlier, their eyes glowing with a sickly, unnatural light. These were the Xalcor's elite forces, their final line of defense. "We have no choice now," Harris said, her voice resolute. "We fight."